The monitor beside my wife's hospital bed slowed in the cold, rainy night. I had sat there for 16 hours while our 3 children never showed up. At 11:47 p.m., the doctor whispered, "She's gone." Before I could hold her hand one last time, a nurse stepped forward and handed me the envelope my wife had left behind. She told me to give this to you only after it was over. Inside there was no will, only an address, a key, and one line that froze me still. If this story already has you feeling something, I'm grateful you're here. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from. Your city, your country, I want to know who's in this room with me. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements woven in for storytelling and reflection purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but everything it's trying to say to you is worth hearing. The steady beeping beside my wife's hospital bed had been fading for hours. I noticed it sometime around 9 that evening. The way the intervals between each tone grew just a little longer, a little softer, like Dorothy herself was teaching the machine to let go slowly. I had been sitting in that chair since early morning, my hand wrapped around hers, watching the rise and fall of her chest, get smaller and smaller until I had to lean in close just to be sure it was still happening. 74 years old, and I had never felt so useless in my life. The room smelled like antiseptic and something faintly floral. A candle one of the nurses had tucked onto the windowsill a few days back, something lavender, something Dorothy would have liked. Rain pressed against the glass in the way it always does in Portland in October, soft and relentless like it had nowhere better to be. I had called Rick at 7 that morning. 3 times. Went to voicemail every time. I texted Vanessa twice. Nothing. I sent Cassie a message that said, "Mom is very close. Please come." She read it. I could see the little check mark turn and did not reply. So it was just me. Me and the beeping and the rain, and a nurse named Patricia, who kept checking in with the kind of quiet professionalism that told me she had done this 100 times before and still hadn't figured out how to make it hurt less for the people left sitting in the chair. At 11:47, the beeping stopped. It didn't fade out the way I had imagined it would. It just ended. One moment there was a rhythm, and the next there was a single flat tone that pressed against the walls of that small room like it intended to stay there forever. My hand tightened around Dorothy's. Her fingers were already cooling. Patricia came in within seconds. She moved with the kind of practiced gentleness that made me grateful someone had trained her so well. She reached across and silenced the monitor without a word, then stood beside me for a moment, with her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "She's gone." I already knew. I had known for at least 10 minutes. But hearing it said out loud by another human being did something to my chest that I still don't have the right words for. It wasn't grief exactly. It was more like the bottom of something dropping away the floor. You had been standing on your whole adult life, just gone, and you're still standing there out of habit. The attending physician came in shortly after. Young man couldn't have been more than 35 dark circles under his eyes that told me he was pulling a long shift. He was kind about it. They confirmed the time of death at 11:47 p.m., and I signed papers with a hand that didn't feel like mine. Patricia was the last one to leave the room. She paused at the door, turned back, and walked toward me with something small held carefully between both hands. A white envelope slightly worn at the corners, my name written on the front in Dorothy's handwriting. "Mrs. Mercer asked me to hold on to this," Patricia said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wet. She was very specific. She said only after. Only give it to him after. I stared at the envelope without taking it for a moment. "She gave this to you herself?" I asked. "About 3 weeks ago," Patricia said, "when she came in for her last round of tests. She pulled me aside in the hallway and asked me to hold on to it at home, not here. She was very specific about that. Said she didn't want it anywhere in the building. She said you'd know what to do with it." I took the envelope. It was lighter than I expected. I turned it over and carefully worked the seal open. Inside were three things: a small black memory card, no bigger than my thumbnail, a folded slip of paper with a handwritten address somewhere along the Columbia River Gorge, a road I didn't recognize, and a single line of Dorothy's handwriting on a separate scrap of paper, her letters careful and deliberate, the way they always were when she was writing something that mattered. Hal, don't grieve yet. There is something you must see first. They are not who you think they are. My thumb pressed down hard on the memory card. The room felt colder than it had a moment before, and it had nothing to do with the October draft coming off the window. I folded everything back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my coat right against my chest. I pressed my palm flat against Dorothy's hand one last time, already cold, already still, and told her something I will keep between the two of us. Then I walked out into the hallway. The corridor outside room 412 smelled like antiseptic and distant coffee and someone else's crying from further down the hall. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, with that particular institutional indifference that has never once in the history of hospitals made anyone feel better. I stood there with my coat still buttoned, Dorothy's envelope over my heart, and I tried to remember how to put one foot in front of the other. That was when my phone lit up in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out. The screen glowed in the dim hallway light, casting pale blue across my knuckles. The name on the screen was Rick, my son, calling for the first time all day. The first time in 17 hours, to be precise. I had been counting the way you count things when you're sitting alone, and the hours have nothing else to fill them. I stood under those fluorescent lights and looked at his name pulsing on the screen, and I felt something move through me that I couldn't quite name yet. My thumb hovered above the answer button. I answered it. I don't know why. Exhaustion, maybe. Or 47 years of instinct when your child calls you pick up. Even at midnight. Even on the worst night of your life. Even when some part of you, the part that had been watching that empty hallway all day, already knew the call was not going to be what you needed it to be. Rick, I said. My voice came out flatter than I intended. Dad? A pause, not the kind that carries weight, just the kind of pause a man makes when he's switching from one conversation to another. So it's done. 3 words. So it's done. Not how are you, not I'm sorry I wasn't there. Not even I'm sorry, period. Just so it's done the way you'd close out a work ticket at the end of the day. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. Your mother passed at 11:47, I said. Okay. Another pause. I could hear a television somewhere in the background on his end, some kind of sports commentary, low but unmistakable. Okay. Listen, Dad, we should probably talk about the house. There are some things that need to be dealt with pretty quickly, and I think it makes sense for all of us to sit down before anything gets... Rick? Before anything gets complicated, you know, legally speaking, there's a window where... Rick. My voice came out quiet. Quieter than I meant it to. Your mother has been dead for 11 minutes. The sports commentary murmured on in the background. My son breathed in slowly on the other end of the line. I know, Dad, he said finally. I know, I'm just trying to be practical. Someone has to be. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it for a second, just looked at the screen, Rick's name glowing there, and then I ended the call without another word. I didn't slam it. I just pressed the button and put the phone back in my pocket and stood there in the parking lot with the October rain falling soft and cold on the back of my neck. I had moved outside without fully realizing it. The automatic doors of Providence St. Vincent had opened for me, and I had walked through them and kept walking until I was standing between 2 parked cars with no memory of making the decision to leave. The parking lot was half empty. A few windows glowed yellow in the hospital above me. Someone's family was probably doing exactly what I had just done, holding a hand, watching a chest, waiting for a sound to stop. My phone buzzed again. Vanessa this time. I answered because I am apparently a man incapable of learning things quickly. Daddy. Her voice was warm the way a hotel lobby is warm, comfortable, designed, not quite real. I heard. I'm so sorry. I couldn't get away today. You know how things pile up, and I thought you'd have the nurses and Vanessa. I was leaning against the wet hood of a stranger's car. I didn't care. Why are you calling? I'm calling because Mom passed and I wanted to. Why are you really calling? A beat of silence. Then, Daddy, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about the estate before things get complicated. That's all. I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about what's best for the family. The estate. That word hit me somewhere behind the sternum, not sharp, just heavy like a stone dropped into still water. Dorothy had been gone for less than 30 minutes. Good night, Vanessa, I said. Dad, wait, I ended that call too. I stood there in the rain for a long time after that. Long enough that my collar was soaked through and my shoes had taken on water, and I still couldn't make myself move toward my car. I kept turning the memory card over between my fingers inside my coat pocket. That small black rectangle Dorothy had prepared for me, the one I wasn't supposed to open until I reached the address on the slip of paper. They are not who you think they are. I had been married to Dorothy Eleanor Mercer for 47 years. She was the most measured person I have ever known, a woman who chose every word like she was spending money she'd saved a long time for. She did not write things for dramatic effect. She did not leave notes designed to alarm, which meant that whatever was on this card, whatever waited at that address in the Columbia River Gorge, she had meant every syllable. I finally got into my car. I didn't start it right away. I just sat behind the wheel with the engine off and the rain beating on the windshield, turning what was left of the evening over in my mind. 2 phone calls. 2 children. Neither one asked how I was holding up. Neither one mentioned sitting with me, coming over, being in the same room as their grief. Just the house. Just the estate. Just before things get complicated. I thought about the 3rd call that hadn't come. Cassie hadn't called at all. Not a text, not a voicemail. Nothing after she had read my message and left it on read that afternoon. My youngest. The one I had always thought felt things more deeply than the other 2. The one who cried at commercials and remembered every birthday and called just to talk sometimes for no reason at all. No reason at all. That thought settled in my chest in a way I didn't want to examine yet. I drove to a motel on Barber Boulevard. Nothing fancy, just clean and quiet, and 12 miles from the hospital, which was all I needed it to be. I paid cash at the front desk, carried nothing but my coat and Dorothy's envelope up to room 7, and sat on the edge of the bed under a lamp that buzzed faintly in the corner. I set the memory card on the nightstand, looked at it. Then I opened my laptop, old thing, nearly 7 years. Dorothy had been after me to replace it, and without letting myself think too hard about it, I slid the card into the slot on the side. A single folder appeared on the screen. For Hal, only open at the address. My hands went very still on the keyboard. The lamp buzzed. The rain had followed me here, tapping at the window above the AC unit with its same patient insistence. She had known I would try to open it tonight. She had known, and she had put that instruction there anyway, not to lock me out, but to make sure that when I did see what was inside, I would be in the right place to understand it. Dorothy had always believed that context was everything, that truth delivered too soon in the wrong room was just noise. I stared at the folder for a long time. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and lay back on top of the covers, with my coat still on, and Dorothy's handwriting pressed against my chest. In the morning I would drive to the gorge. I left the motel before the sun had any real intention of rising. 6:15 in the morning. Barber Boulevard still wet and dark. The kind of quiet that only exists in a city that hasn't fully decided to wake up yet. I stopped at a gas station long enough to fill the tank and pour the worst cup of coffee I have ever paid $4 for, and then I pointed the car east and drove. The historic Columbia River Highway runs along the southern rim of the gorge like someone drew it there by hand, slow, deliberate, hugging the rock face on one side and dropping away to nothing on the other. I have driven that road 100 times in 40 years of living in Oregon. I know where the viewpoints are. I know where the pavement goes slick in the rain. I know the exact bend where the river appears below you all at once, wide and gray and permanent, in a way that makes whatever you were worried about feel briefly smaller. That Saturday morning, with Dorothy's handwriting on the passenger seat and fog sitting so thick on the water, I could barely see the Washington side. Nothing felt smaller. Everything felt exactly as large as it was. The address took me off the main road east of Corbett, a gap in the tree line with no marker, just a gravel track that my old Subaru complained about, in the dignified way old Subarus do. Douglas firs closed in overhead, their branches laced together above the path, like the nave of a church nobody had ever named. I followed the track for nearly a mile before the trees opened up. The cabin was smaller than I expected, cedar siding gone silver with weather, a covered porch with 2 wooden chairs set at an angle toward each other, not side by side but angled the way 2 people sit when they intend to talk. A woodpile stacked neat under a tarp. Window boxes empty now but with dark, recently turned soil. Somebody had been tending this place. Somebody had been coming here regularly, quietly, without telling me. My wife had been coming here. I sat in the car for a moment with the engine off and the October air pressing cold against the windows. Then I got out. The ground was soft under my boots, that particular Pacific Northwest softness that comes from 100 years of fire needles composting into something almost like carpet. I walked to the porch steps, and that was when I saw the stone round smooth shaped by the river into something that fit perfectly in a palm. Heart-shaped. The kind Dorothy used to pick up on walks and slip into her coat pocket without explaining why. We had used a stone like that once, at our first house on Savier Street 39 years ago. A spare key hidden for the 2 of us, a private code that nobody else would ever think to look for. My throat closed so hard it hurt. I crouched down and lifted the stone. The key was underneath, just as I knew it would be. Brass slightly tarnished, warm from the earth. The lock opened on the first try. Inside the cabin breathed warm and cedar-scented, and faintly lavender, the way Dorothy always made every space smell, as though she carried that particular comfort with her wherever she went. Morning light came through the windows in long, dusty lines. A wool blanket folded over the back of a chair. A ceramic mug beside a stack of paperbacks. A pair of reading glasses on the windowsill that I recognized immediately, the ones she told me she'd lost 2 summers ago. Dot. Her name came out of me like something I'd been holding underwater. I pressed my fist against my mouth and stood in the doorway of that small, warm room and just breathed for a minute, because breathing was all I had. Against the far wall sat a simple pine writing desk. On it, a laptop I recognized as the one she'd said stopped working 2 years ago. An accordion folder thick and carefully tabbed, and centered on the desk, placed with absolute deliberate intention, a large sealed envelope. Just my name. Just Hal in her handwriting. My hands shook as I broke the seal. 6 pages, front and back. Her letters even and careful at the top of the first page, growing slower and more deliberate as the pages turned, as though each word had cost her something. She was rationing carefully. Hal, if you are reading this, then Patricia did what I asked. You found the key. You let yourself in. Good. I knew you would. You always find what I leave for you. I have been coming to this cabin for 3 years. I purchased it outright 18 months ago with money from my pension that I kept separate. I am sorry for the secrecy. By the time you finish what I've left on the memory card, I believe you will understand why it was necessary. I could not tell you directly. You would have protected them. You have spent 50 years finding ways to protect the 3 of them, and I have loved you for it, even when it broke my heart. so I decided to show you instead. Everything on the card is real. Everything is documented. Everything is true. Follow the folders in order. Don't skip ahead. Promise me, Hal. I set the letter against my chest. The cabin was very quiet. Outside, a stellar jay landed on the porch railing and screamed once at nothing in particular, then left. I found her day planner in the accordion folder. The last entry, a visit to this cabin, was dated 12 days before her final hospitalization. She had driven out here alone. Already sick enough that I was helping her in and out of the car at home, and she had driven 45 minutes into the gorge by herself and done whatever she needed to do, and driven home and said nothing. The burning behind my eyes broke loose. I pressed both palms flat against the desk and bent my head and let it happen, chest heaving, shoulders shaking. The ugly kind of crying a man does when he's been holding something too long and his body simply overrules him. I cried for Dorothy, and for the years she spent coming to this cabin alone, and for every dinner we sat through while she knew things I couldn't imagine. And I cried because the reading glasses on the windowsill were the ones I had helped her look for, and she had said, "Oh, they'll turn up," and smiled at me in the way she always smiled when she was protecting me from something. When I came back to myself, I wiped my face on my sleeve, sat down in her chair, still shaped faintly to her, and opened the laptop. The memory card slotted in. The screen loaded. A single folder appeared, organized with the precision of a woman who had spent 40 years making sure her students never had to guess what came next. I clicked it open. The first thing I saw was a note Dorothy had typed and pinned to the top of the directory. A simple, plain document, no formatting, just her words. "What you are about to read will change how you see them. I know that. I spent 3 years hoping I was wrong. I was not wrong. Take your time. Take all the time you need. But read everything before you do anything. Love. I took a breath that shook on the way in and steadied on the way out. Then I started reading. I read for 10 hours straight. I know that sounds like an exaggeration. It isn't. I got up twice, once to use the bathroom, once to find something to eat in the cabin kitchen, where Dorothy had left a box of crackers and a jar of peanut butter on the shelf beside the coffee thermos, because she had thought of everything, including the fact that I would forget to feed myself. I ate standing at the counter without tasting any of it, then went straight back to the desk. The folders were organized the way Dorothy organized everything, chronologically color-coded, with typed summaries at the front of each section, so I would know what I was walking into before I walked into it. She had learned that from 30 years in a classroom. You don't drop children into the deep end without preparation. You tell them what's coming first. She had done the same for me. The first folder was labeled Phone Logs. I put my headphones in and started with the oldest file. Rick's voice came through clean and steady, a recorded call from 14 months ago, his deal-closing voice, the one I recognized from 100 business dinners over the years. He was talking to Vanessa. "She's not going to make it through winter. Cassie's pretty sure about the timeline. So we need to get ahead of the house question before Dad does something sentimental with it." "What kind of sentimental?" Vanessa asked. "Donates it. Gives it to a church. You know how he gets." "So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we get Hoffman on our side early. He's handling Mom's paperwork. I've been keeping in touch, making sure we stay informed." "Does he know you're paying him?" "He knows what he needs to know." I pulled the headphones out and sat back. Gerald Hoffman, the attorney Dorothy had chosen to handle her will, the man who had shaken my hand at the hospital and expressed his condolences with what I had taken for genuine feeling. Rick had been paying him, keeping him informed. The man entrusted with my wife's final wishes was on my son's payroll. I put the headphones back in because stopping wasn't an option anymore. The financial folders came next, and they were worse, methodical, documented, every number cross-referenced against bank statements Dorothy had somehow obtained. Rick had borrowed $340,000 from a private lending company registered in Henderson, Nevada. 22% annual interest. The balance had grown to over $400,000. The collateral listed on the supplementary agreement, a document I had never seen, a document that bore Dorothy's signature in handwriting, that was almost hers, but not quite, was our home. Our house on Lake Oswego. The one we bought in 1991 with 6 years of savings. Dorothy had written in the margin in letters pressed so hard, the pen nearly went through. He used my name without asking, like it already belonged to him. Then came Vanessa's folder. I had told myself I was ready. I was not ready. Dorothy had printed every post from Vanessa's Instagram account going back 3 years. 280,000 followers, a platform built on the image of a devoted daughter caring for her ailing mother. The photographs were real. I recognized them, Vanessa sitting beside Dorothy, holding her hand, bringing flowers. What Dorothy had done was place each photograph beside a page from her own visitor log, a small notebook she had kept meticulously recording every visit, every date, every duration. The photographs spanned 3 years of posts. The visits they depicted had all occurred on a single Saturday afternoon in March 4 years ago, when Dorothy was still well enough to smile for the camera. Vanessa had photographed her mother once and spent 4 years pretending it was an ongoing devotion. Worse, Dorothy had found the emails. 2 organizations, Aging with Dignity Foundation and Pacific Northwest Elder Care Fund, had each received grant applications from Vanessa describing herself as the primary caregiver for a terminally ill parent. She had attached those photographs as documentation. She had received $23,400 in combined funding over 18 months. I stood up so fast, the chair rolled back and hit the wall. I walked to the kitchen and put both hands on the counter and breathed through my nose for a long time. My chest felt like something was tightening around it from the outside, not a pain exactly, more like pressure, the kind that builds when you're trying very hard to stay in control of yourself. She sold her mother, I thought. She took pictures of her mother and sold them. Cassie's folder was last. Dorothy had labeled it, most important, read last, and I understood why the moment I opened it, because if I had read it first, I would not have been able to read anything else. Cassie had accessed Dorothy's medical records 34 times in 18 months. Dorothy had a contact at the hospital, a longtime colleague who had pulled the access logs. Cassie visited her mother 3 times in that same period. She was not accessing those records out of concern. She was monitoring a timeline. The recorded calls confirmed it. Cassie speaking to Rick in a tone so flat and clinical it turned my stomach. The new medication is buying her time. Could be another 8 to 12 months. You might want to adjust the plan. And later, 6 weeks before Dorothy's final hospitalization. Her kidneys are starting to go. The attending said 6 to 8 weeks. I'd start making arrangements. My youngest child. The one who cried every Christmas when Dorothy read aloud. The one who called me last Easter just to talk. She had been filing reports on her mother's dying like a project manager updating a schedule. I found Dorothy's final note at the bottom of Cassie's folder, written on a piece of notepaper in the shaky handwriting of her last weeks. Hal, I know this one is the hardest. It was hardest for me too. She was our baby, but she made her choices long before I made mine. Don't protect her because of what she used to be. She didn't protect me. I folded that note and held it against my chest for a long time. Outside, the gorge had gone fully dark. At some point, the afternoon had become evening without asking my permission. I was still sitting in Dorothy's chair at Dorothy's desk in the cabin she had kept secret for 3 years, to protect the truth she knew I wasn't ready to hear until she was gone. I understood now why she had done it this way. Why she hadn't told me face to face. Because she was right, I would have gone to them. I would have given Rick the chance to explain. I would have listened to Vanessa cry and Cassie apologize, and I would have found a way, the way I always found a way, to believe that the children I had raised were still somewhere inside the adults who had done these things. Dorothy had loved me enough to take that choice away from me. I closed the laptop, picked up my phone. found the name Dorothy had written on the note card at the bottom of the accordion folder, Alice Vanderbilt Estate Attorney, 503-448-291, and dialed. She picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Mercer," she said, as though she had been expecting me. "I've been waiting for your call." "How much do you know?" I asked. "Everything," she said. Dorothy made sure of that. "Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" I looked around the cabin one last time, the blanket on the chair, the reading glasses on the sill, the thermos she had left so I wouldn't go cold, while I learned the worst things I had ever learned about my own children. "I'll be there," I said. Alice Vanderbilt's office was on the 4th floor of a brick building on Southwest Broadway, the kind of building that had been standing since before my parents were born, with floors that announced every step and windows that rattled slightly when the Max train passed below. I found the door at 9 on the dot, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still carrying the weight of 10 hours in Dorothy's cabin, like something I'd packed and couldn't put down. Alice met me at the door herself. Mid-50s silver hair, cut short and practical, the kind of handshake that told you immediately she had no interest in wasting your time or hers. She was exactly what Dorothy would have chosen, someone who got things done without making noise about it. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Come in. Can I get you coffee?" "Please," I said. "Black." She poured 2 cups from a machine on the credenza and set mine in front of me before sitting down across the desk. No small talk. No extended condolences. Just 2 people who both understood why we were here. "Dorothy contacted me 14 months ago," Alice began. "She had already been working on the evidence you found in the cabin for over a year at that point. She came to me because she needed someone Hoffman didn't know about. She didn't trust him," I said. "She suspected him. By the time she hired me, she had already begun to notice inconsistencies in how he communicated with her versus what she was hearing from other sources." Alice wrapped both hands around her mug. She was right not to trust him. We confirmed later that Rick had been in contact with Hoffman for at least 8 months, paying him for information about the will's structure and looking for grounds to contest it. My jaw tightened. "So the will Hoffman drafted is legally valid," Alice said firmly. "Dorothy was meticulous. Every document Hoffman touched was reviewed independently by my office. The will he drafted reflects her true wishes. What he was selling Rick was information, not influence, and even that will cost him his license when the Bar Association reviews it." She paused. "But that's a separate matter. What I need to walk you through this morning is what Dorothy actually built." Alice opened a folder and turned it to face me across the desk. "Dorothy's will leaves the entirety of her estate to you, the Lake Oswego property, all savings, personal property, and her life insurance benefit. That portion is straightforward." She tapped the next page. "This is the part your children are not expecting." I leaned forward. "There is a conditional clause embedded in the will," Alice said. "In plain terms, if any of your children contest this will in court, the clause activates. And when it activates, I am authorized to present to the court every piece of evidence Dorothy spent 3 years collecting. Every recorded call, every financial document, every photograph comparison, every access log from the hospital." Alice looked at me steadily. "Dorothy designed this will as a trap, Mr. Mercer. If they stay quiet, you receive everything and they receive nothing, but they walk away free. If they contest it, they drag themselves into a courtroom where their own behavior becomes the evidence against them." I sat back in the chair. My chest felt strange, not tight the way it had been for 2 days, but open, almost hollow, like something that had been braced for impact had finally been allowed to stand down. "She knew they'd contest it," I said. "She was certain of it," Alice said, and something close to admiration moved across her face. "She told me they won't be able to help themselves. The money will be too close. They'll reach for it. She said she wanted to give them the choice, and she wanted the choice to be theirs." I thought about Dorothy sitting at that pine desk in the Gorge building, this methodical patient alone, building a legal structure so precise that our children's own greed would become the mechanism of their exposure. She had been a teacher for 30 years. She understood that some lessons could not be given. They had to be learned. "There's one more thing," Alice said. She reached into the folder and produced a business card, her own, with a handwritten note on the back in Dorothy's writing. "Give this to Hal after you explain the clause. He'll need it for what comes next." She left instructions for almost every contingency, Alice added quietly. I have never had a client prepare so thoroughly. I was still looking at the card when my phone buzzed on the desk between us. I glanced at the screen. A text from Rick's dad. "We need to meet, all three of us, about Mom's estate. Today, if possible. Don't make any decisions until we talk." Then one from Vanessa. 30 seconds later, "Daddy, please call me. We're worried about you making decisions while you're grieving. We just want to help." Then Cassie, "Dad, can we talk just us? I miss you." I set the phone face down on the desk. Alice watched me do it. "They've been in contact with each other," she said. It wasn't a question. "Apparently," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "How long before they file?" "Based on what I know about their attorney, Rick retained someone last week before Dorothy had even passed. I would estimate within 10 days. Alice closed the folder with a quiet final sound. "Let them file, Mr. Mercer. That's my advice. Every day they wait, they're paying attorney fees for a case Dorothy already beat." I picked up the phone, looked at the 3 messages one more time, and put it back in my pocket without answering any of them. "There's someone else Dorothy wanted me to see," I said. "A Dr. Samuel Whitmore." She left his card in the cabin. Something shifted in Alice's expression, not surprise, more like recognition. "Go see him," she said. "Today, if he's available. What he tells you will matter before this is over." Samuel Whitmore's practice was in Beaverton, a quiet drive west on the Sunset Highway, 20 minutes from downtown Portland, in Sunday traffic. The building was low brick, tucked between a dental office and an insurance agency on a street that looked like 1,000 other professional streets in suburban Oregon. Nothing about it suggested that inside a man had been keeping secrets that belonged to my family for 30 years. His receptionist had told me on the phone that Dr. Whitmore would see me at 2. When I walked through the door at 1:58, he was already waiting in the hallway. 60 years old, maybe a little past it. Gray at the temples, the kind of lean that comes from a lifetime of discipline rather than luck. He shook my hand with both of his and held it an extra second, not awkward, just deliberate, the way a person does when they want you to know the gesture is real. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'm very sorry about Dorothy. She was one of the most remarkable people I've had the privilege of knowing." "You knew her well," I said. "It came out flatter than I intended." "I did." He gestured toward his office. "Please, come sit down. There's a great deal I need to tell you, and I want to do it properly." His office was the opposite of Alice's warmer, lived-in books, stacked in ways that suggested they got used rather than displayed. He sat across from me in a leather chair rather than behind the desk, which I noticed. Dorothy had probably told him I didn't respond well to people who hid behind furniture. "I need to say something before I say anything else." Whitmore began leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I am breaking confidentiality today. I want you to understand that clearly, and understand that Dorothy anticipated it and made it legally possible." He reached to the side table and picked up a document. "This is a release authorization signed by Dorothy 8 weeks before her death. It allows me to share with you specifically information about patients I have treated who are members of your immediate family." My stomach dropped about 3 inches. "Which members?" I said carefully. Whitmore held my gaze. "Richard, Vanessa, Cassandra." The room felt like it had shifted slightly on its foundation. I gripped the armrests of the chair, not hard, just enough to feel something solid. "You treated all 3 of them," I said. "Beginning when Rick was 14, Whitmore said. Dorothy brought him to me first. She had noticed patterns in his behavior that concerned her, a consistent inability to empathize with consequences that affected others, a tendency to construct elaborate justifications for actions he knew were wrong. She didn't know what she was seeing. She just knew something was off. He paused. Over the following years, she brought Vanessa and Cassandra as well. Different presentations, same underlying architecture. What does that mean? I asked. In plain terms. In plain terms, all three of your children were diagnosed at various points in their adolescence with narcissistic personality disorder. Rick, most severely. Vanessa, more performative in her presentation. Cassandra's was the most subtle, and in my clinical opinion, the most calculated. Whitmore's voice was steady and careful, each word placed like something fragile. I want to be clear, Mr. Mercer, this is not an excuse for their behavior as adults. A diagnosis explains a pattern. It does not justify choices. My throat was burning. Not from tears, I was past tears for the moment, but from the particular heat of understanding something you should have seen a long time ago and didn't. Dorothy knew, I said. She knew their diagnosis. She found out 7 years ago, Whitmore said. She came to me not as their parent, but as she called herself, a concerned observer. She had figured out from things each of them had said over the years that they had all seen the same doctor as teenagers. She asked me to confirm it. I couldn't at the time, confidentiality, but she was already certain. He sat back. She spent 7 years watching them, Mr. Mercer. 7 years trying to love them in ways that might reach whatever part of them could still be reached. And 3 years accepting that it couldn't. I pressed my hand flat against my chest because my heart was doing something painful and irregular behind my ribs. She never told me, I said. Not once in 7 years. She told me why. Whitmore said, his voice dropping gently. She said, and I'm quoting, because she said it more than once. Hal sees the best in everyone. It's the thing I love most about him, and the thing that will destroy him if I let it. She was protecting you, the way she always protected you. The burning spread from my throat to the backs of my eyes. I pressed my fingers against my forehead and breathed through it. Your children told people I was involved with Dorothy romantically, Whitmore said quietly. I don't know how widely it circulated. Patricia mentioned it to Dorothy last spring, that the rumor had reached a few people on the floor. Dorothy told me herself. She wasn't upset. She said they needed a story that made sense to them, and his voice had gone quieter, how careful with the words. I want you to know, and I understand, if you've heard otherwise, that is not true. It was never true. Dorothy was my patient's mother, and then she was someone I admired enormously, and those are the only things she ever was to me. I know, I said. And I did know, had known really the moment I read the note card in the cabin with his name on it. Dorothy would not have sent me to a man she had betrayed me with. That was not who she was. There is one more thing, Whitmore said. He reached to the side table again and picked up a sealed envelope. Dorothy left this with me 8 weeks ago. Her final session notes what she said in our last appointment before she was admitted. He held it out toward me. She asked me to give it to you in person. She said read it when you're ready, not before. I took the envelope. It was light in my hand, just a few pages inside, but it felt heavier than anything I had carried in 2 days. I stood to leave, and Whitmore walked me to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and said, Mr. Mercer, whatever comes next in court with your children, Dorothy gave you everything you need. She made sure of that. I nodded, not trusting my voice right then. Outside, the Beaverton afternoon was gray and mild, the kind of Sunday that asks nothing of you. I sat in my car with Whitmore's envelope on the passenger seat and stared through the windshield for a long moment. Then my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I answered. A man's voice, flat and businesslike. Mr. Mercer, you don't know me. but I think you should know your son owes us a significant amount of money, and his deadline is November 15th. We'd strongly prefer to resolve this without involving the Lake Oswego property. But if he can't produce the funds— "Who is this?" I said. "Someone who'd rather talk to you than to a judge," the voice said. "Call your son Mr. Mercer. Tell him time is running out." The line went dead. The Lake Oswego house looked exactly the same from the outside. That was the first thing that hit me when I turned into the driveway at 6 that Sunday evening. The maple in the front yard had gone full amber. The porch light was on, and for exactly 1 second, my chest seized with the old reflex, the one that said, "Dorothy's home, the light's on, everything's fine." Then I saw Rick's Audi parked at the curb, Vanessa's rental behind it, and the reflex died. They were inside. All three of them in my house, waiting. I sat in the car for a moment with my hands on the wheel. I thought about Alice saying, "Let them file." I thought about Dorothy writing, "You would have protected them." I thought about 10 hours in a cabin reading things that could not be unread. Then I got out of the car and walked through my own front door. They were in the living room, Rick on the couch, Vanessa in the armchair by the window. Cassie perched on the edge of the coffee table like she couldn't commit to sitting down. The television was off. Someone had made coffee. The whole scene had the careful staging of a meeting someone had rehearsed. Rick stood up first. He had dressed for this jacket-pressed shirt, the uniform he wore when he wanted to project competence. His face arranged itself into something that was supposed to look like grief, and looked instead like a man performing grief for an audience he didn't fully respect. "Dad," he said, opening his arms, "we've been so worried about you." I let him hug me. I stood there with my arms at my sides and let him do it. And I felt absolutely nothing except the hard certainty that Dorothy had been right about everything. Vanessa was crying before I even turned to face her. The kind of crying that comes with perfect mascara. Intact tears tracked carefully down each cheek like they'd been placed there. "Daddy," she said, reaching for both my hands. "We should have been there." "I know. I know we should have been there, and I'm so sorry." "It's all right, Vanessa," I said, because it was easier than explaining that it wasn't. Cassie didn't hug me. She touched my arm briefly, a clinical gesture, the kind a nurse makes when she's checking on a patient she's not particularly invested in, and said, "You look tired, Dad. Have you been sleeping?" "Not much," I said honestly. I sat down in Dorothy's chair. The three of them redistributed themselves around the room, and for a moment nobody said anything, which was unusual because Rick had never in his adult life gone more than 45 consecutive seconds without filling a silence. He managed about 30 this time. "Dad." He started leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "We've been talking, the three of us, and we want you to know we're here for you, whatever you need. But we also think it's important that we address some practical matters before things get complicated with the estate." "The estate," I said. "Mom's wishes." Vanessa jumped in her voice, smoothing over Rick's bluntness like fresh paint over a crack. "We just want to make sure everything is handled in a way that's fair to everyone, that honors what Mom would have wanted." I looked at Cassie. She was watching me with those careful nurse's eyes, assessing, calculating, running whatever diagnostics she ran on people to decide how much of a problem they were going to be. I had always thought that look meant she was concerned. Now I understood it differently. "What did your mother want, do you think?" I asked the room. Rick shifted. "Well, that's the thing, Dad. We're not sure the will reflects what she actually wanted. Toward the end, her judgment wasn't always, 'Rick.'" My voice came out quiet and flat and final, and something in his expression flickered. "Your mother was the sharpest person in any room she ever walked into, including the last room she was ever in. Choose your next words carefully." A beat of charged air. Vanessa's perfect tears had stopped flowing. Cassie's hands were very still in her lap. "We've consulted with an attorney," Rick said, pivoting without missing a step the way he always pivoted when one approach stopped working. "Just to understand our options. That's all. Which attorney? I asked. Someone Alice recommended, actually, Vanessa began. That's not true, Cassie said sharply, cutting across her sister without looking at her. We retained Mitchell Graves 3 weeks ago. She said it looking directly at me, and I understood in that moment that Cassie had decided honesty was her best play. The most dangerous thing about her was that she was always recalculating. 3 weeks ago. While Dorothy was still alive. While Dorothy was lying in a hospital bed on the 4th floor of Providence St. Vincent, and her youngest daughter was reporting her kidney function to her eldest son, Cassie had also been helping them retain an attorney to contest the will. I felt something move through me then, not rage, not grief, something colder and more permanent than either. The particular chill of a door closing. I see, I said. Dad, please, Vanessa started. I'd like you all to go home, I said. It's been a long few days and I need to rest. Rick's jaw tightened. We're not trying to fight with you. I know exactly what you're trying to do, I said, standing up from Dorothy's chair. And I know you retained Mitchell Graves 3 weeks ago. I know about the Meridian Capital debt. I know about the collateral. I watched Rick's face go the color of old concrete. I know quite a lot, actually. So does my attorney. I think it would be best if any further conversation happened through her. The room had gone very still. Vanessa's hand was pressed against her mouth. Cassie was the only one whose expression didn't change. She just looked at me with those assessing eyes and gave the smallest nod, as if I had confirmed something she had suspected. I walked to the front door and opened it. None of them said anything else. They filed out in a sequence that felt like the end of something. Rick first, his shoulders rigid, Vanessa clutching her purse without looking at me. Cassie last, pausing in the doorway, just long enough to say, I hope you know what you're doing, Dad. I'm learning, I said. I closed the door, stood in the hallway of my own house with Dorothy's reading chair visible through the living room doorway, the one that still held the shape of her, and I pressed my back against the wall and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. I drove to Savier Street the next morning, not because I had planned to. I woke at 5:30 in the house that felt 3 times larger than it used to, made coffee in the kitchen, where Dorothy's handwriting was still on the grocery list, magneted to the refrigerator. Oat milk, good bread. The lemon cookies Hal pretends not to like, and stood there reading it until my eyes went blurry. Then I picked up Dorothy's letter from the cabin, turned to the page where she had written, Don't forget the house on Savier Hall. What's buried there is older than all of this, and I got in the car. Northwest Portland in early October has a particular quality of light gray-white, diffused, the kind that makes everything look like it's been there forever and intends to stay. The craftsman houses on Savier Street sat the same way they always had, their covered porches and tapered columns holding the morning, with the comfortable permanence of things built to last. I had not driven down this street in 11 years. We sold the house in 2011. Young couple bought it. She was a landscape architect. He worked in tech. I remembered signing the papers and thinking the neighborhood was in good hands. I parked out front and sat looking at the house for a moment. The new owners had repainted it deep green now, instead of the cream we had with dark red trim that suited the old bones of the place better than our color ever had. A child's bicycle was locked to the porch railing. Somebody's life was happening in there, full and ordinary and completely unaware of mine. I walked up the front steps and knocked. The woman who answered was mid-30s, paint-stained jeans, morning coffee in hand. She looked at me with the open curiosity of someone who wasn't expecting company, but wasn't unfriendly about it either. "Can I help you?" she asked. "My name is Harold Mercer," I said. "My wife and I owned this house until about 14 years ago. I apologize for showing up without calling. I know that's an imposition. My wife passed away 3 days ago, and she left me a note asking me to check something in the basement before the legal proceedings moved forward." My voice held. I was proud of that. There may be something she stored behind the wood paneling in the back wall. She didn't always tell me where she put things. The woman's expression shifted immediately into something warm and open, the way people's faces do when grief enters the conversation and they recognize it. "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said. "Please come in. Take whatever time you need." Her name was Jennifer. She led me through rooms that were both familiar and foreign, same bones, different life filling them. The staircase I had refinished by hand in 1997 still had the same slight creak on the fourth step. The kitchen window still looked out over the backyard with that particular angle of morning light I had always liked. The basement door was where it had always been off the kitchen hallway. Jennifer opened it for me and offered to come down, and I thanked her and told her I was fine alone. I found the light switch by memory. The basement smelled like old wood and damp concrete, and something faintly metallic, the way basements do when they've been closed up through many seasons. My old workspace was still there in the back corner, the workbench, the shelving units I had built. Even the pegboard where I used to hang my tools, though Jennifer's husband had replaced my tools with his own. The wood paneling ran along the back wall. I had installed it myself in the fall of 1998, over a weekend, when Dorothy had taken the kids to her mother's. 8 panels, tongue and groove cedar screwed into the studs. I had always been proud of how clean the seams were. The third panel from the left was the one I had never fully secured 1 screw instead of 4 on purpose, because that was where I had originally planned to put an electrical outlet and never got around to it. Dorothy must have found it years later, long after we'd sold the house. She had told me once casually that she'd run into Jennifer at the farmer's market on Shemansky, that the family loved. The house hadn't touched the basement, used it only for storage. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Now I understood why she'd asked. I pressed the panel at the corner. It swung out on the 1 screw like a small door. Behind it, in the space between the paneling and the concrete foundation wall, sat a metal box about the size of a shoebox, dark green, the kind that used to be sold at hardware stores for keeping documents fireproof. I had bought that box myself years ago. I did not remember giving it to Dorothy. My hands were not steady as I lifted it out. Inside, a stack of documents held together with binder clips, paper-clipped to a handwritten index in Dorothy's writing. Bank statements from the company account of Mercer & Sons Construction going back to 2008. Spreadsheets printed and annotated. Copies of wire transfer authorizations. And at the front, Dorothy's summary note dated 11 months ago. What follows is documentation of approximately $214,000 removed from Mercer & Son company accounts between 2008 and 2015. Rick used his co-signing authority to authorize payments to 3 shell companies. None of these companies performed any work for Mercer & Sons. Vanessa received $34,000 through marketing invoice fraud. I have confirmed with our former accountant that these transactions were never audited internally because Rick controlled the review process. $214,000 over 7 years. While I was building the company, signing contracts, showing up at job sites at 6 in the morning, with my coffee and my plans, trusting my son with the books, because I thought it was time he learned the business. My legs went out from under me, not completely, but enough that I had to sit down on the cold concrete floor with the metal box in my lap, because standing was no longer something I could negotiate with my body. I sat there in my dead wife's secret basement archive and pressed one hand flat over my eyes and felt the full, crushing weight of what it means to discover that the story of your own life was never quite what you thought it was. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough that Jennifer knocked gently at the top of the stairs and called down, "Mr. Mercer, can I get you anything?" "I'm all right," I called back, and my voice sounded remarkably like a man who was not all right at all. I packed the documents back into the box, tucked it under my arm, and climbed the stairs. Jennifer was waiting in the kitchen with a glass of water and the decent instinct not to ask questions. I thanked her twice, which didn't feel like enough, and walked back out into the Savier Street morning. I had just reached my car when my phone buzzed. A text from Alice Hall. They filed this morning. 9:47 a.m. Multnomah County. It started. I stood on the sidewalk of the street where I had raised my children and looked at those words on my screen. Then I looked up at the old house, the green paint, the red trim, the bicycle on the porch, and thought about Dorothy driving here alone, going down those basement stairs, alone hiding this box, alone because she loved me enough to do the hard things so I wouldn't have to do them blind. I got in the car. I called Alice. "Tell me what we do next," I said. Alice was waiting for me at the door when I arrived, not her receptionist. Alice herself, jacket still on a folder tucked under one arm, and the expression of someone who had spent the morning doing things that needed doing and was ready to report. That was the thing about Alice Vanderbilt, she never made you wait for the news. Good or bad, she led with it. "They filed at 9:47, she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Mitchell Graves is handling it. He's competent, which means this will be a real fight. But Dorothy anticipated a competent opponent." She set the folder on the conference table and opened it. "Sit down, Hal. There's quite a bit to go through." I sat. My back was aching from the Savier Street basement floor, and I had not eaten since the crackers at the cabin 2 days ago, but neither of those things felt important enough to address right now. "Their filing claims 3 things," Alice said, turning the document to face me. "First, undue influence. They're arguing that Dorothy's judgment was compromised in her final months, and that you manipulated her into changing the will in your favor." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my ear. "We were married 47 years. I know." Second, diminished mental capacity. They've retained a psychiatrist who never examined Dorothy to provide a retrospective opinion that she may have suffered cognitive decline. Alice's voice stayed level, but her eyes had gone sharp. Third, and this is the one Graves clearly thinks is their strongest argument, they're claiming you exerted financial control over Dorothy that isolated her from her children. "She isolated herself from them," I said, "because of what they were doing. I know that, and we can prove it." Alice tapped the folder. "Which brings me to Gerald Hoffman." She said his name the way you say the name of something you've stepped in. "Tell me," I said. "Dorothy suspected him from the beginning of their professional relationship. She told me that in our first meeting. She noticed that certain questions he asked about the will's structure were more specific than they needed to be. Questions about the conditional clause in particular." Alice slid a printed email chain across the table. "My contact at a firm 2 blocks from Hoffman's office passed this along 3 weeks ago. It's a chain of 12 emails between Hoffman and Rick Mercer spanning 8 months. I picked up the pages. Rick's name at the top of every other email, Hoffman's office address in the header. My chest began to burn. And in plain terms, Alice said Hoffman was providing Rick with a detailed roadmap of your wife's will. He told Rick the exact structure of the conditional clause, the timing requirements, and most damaging, he advised Rick on which specific grounds of contest would be most difficult for our side to defeat. He sold her out," I said. The words came out rough and scorched. "She paid him to protect her wishes, and he sold them to our son. For $15,000 transferred in 3 installments to a personal account." Alice's voice had gone very quiet, the way voices do when the facts are ugly enough to speak for themselves. "I have already filed a complaint with the Oregon State Bar. Hoffman will face a disciplinary hearing. In the meantime, the emails themselves are admissible as evidence of bad faith in the contest proceedings. They demonstrate that Rick had inside knowledge of the will, which actually strengthens our position considerably." I pushed the emails back across the table because I could not look at them anymore without my hands doing something I would regret. "I want to confront him," I said. Alice studied me for a moment. "That's your right," she said carefully. "He is technically still your attorney of record until you formally terminate the relationship. You can walk into his office today and fire him in person. A pause. I would advise you not to discuss the case. Just terminate. Understood, I said. Hoffman's office was 6 minutes away on foot. I walked. Pearl District on a Monday afternoon was its usual combination of gallery windows and coffee shops, and people who looked like they had somewhere specific to be. I walked through it without seeing any of it. The email chain folded in my jacket pocket and pushed through the door of Hoffman and Associates at 3:45. The receptionist, young woman, genuinely pleasant, started to ask if I had an appointment. I told her I didn't and that I would wait. I sat in the leather chair nearest the door and folded my hands in my lap and waited with the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting his whole life for things and has finally run out of patience for it. Hoffman came out 12 minutes later. He was a well-kept man, good suit, careful haircut, the practiced warmth of someone whose livelihood depended on making people feel comfortable placing their most important things in his hands. He extended his hand, and I did not take it. "Mr. Mercer," he said, recalibrating smoothly. "I'm so glad you came in. There are some developments I wanted to discuss with—" "I'm terminating your representation," I said. "Effective today. I'll need all documents related to my wife's estate transferred to Alice Vanderbilt's office by end of business Wednesday." Hoffman's smooth face did something complicated. "I understand you're going through an incredibly difficult time, and if there's been any miscommunication about how I've been handling—" "There's been no miscommunication," I said. I reached into my jacket pocket and placed the folded emails on the reception desk between us without opening them. I watched his eyes go to them, and watched his face do the thing faces do when a man realizes the ground he was standing on has been gone for a while. "Wednesday," I said. "Everything." He didn't say anything else. I walked out into the Pearl District afternoon, and the cold October air hit my face like something I had earned. My phone rang before I reached the corner. "Alice, how did it go?" she asked. "Clean," I said. "Good." A brief pause. "Hal, I need you to go to your hotel tonight and open the last file Dorothy left on the memory card, the one labeled October 3rd. She told me about it. She said you would know when you were ready." Another pause, smaller. "I think you're ready." I stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. October 3rd, the day Dorothy died. "What's in it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "The waiting room," Alice said quietly. "She wanted you to see what they did while you were with her. What I'm about to share with you, I almost didn't include it, because once you hear it, you can't unhear it. If you're ready, type "I'm here" in the comments, so I know who's still standing with me before we walk into that waiting room together. A small note. The story ahead contains some recreated elements to serve the telling. If you feel this content isn't for you, it is completely okay to stop right here. I checked into a hotel on the east side that evening. The Lloyd District Marriott. Nothing memorable about it, just clean sheets and a desk lamp, and enough distance from the Lake Oswego house that I could breathe without feeling Dorothy's absence in every square foot of the place. I ordered room service. I didn't eat, sat on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on, and opened the laptop. The memory card was still in the port. I had not removed it since the cabin. I navigated to the last folder, the one I had seen but not opened because Dorothy had organized everything in order, and I had followed her instructions, and this was the last thing she wanted me to see. Waiting room, October 3rd, a single video file, 43 minutes and 17 seconds long. I pressed play. The footage was shot from a high angle, a small device no larger than a thumb drive, positioned inside Dorothy's own canvas tote bag, propped on the seat beside where she had last sat, before being moved to the ICU. Patricia had placed it there that afternoon at Dorothy's request before the children arrived. Dorothy had chosen the bag deliberately, the kind with a woven panel on the front that concealed the lens completely. The waiting room was semi-public, no posted signage prohibiting recording. Oregon's one-party consent covered it. Dorothy had checked. The timestamp in the corner read 2:14 p.m. October 3rd. The same afternoon, Dorothy was admitted to the ICU for the last time. I was not in that waiting room. I was down the hall in the room with Dorothy holding her hand, the way I had held it for 47 years, while outside in the blue chairs, my 3 children sat together for the first time in months. Rick came into frame first, then Vanessa, her phone already out. Then Cassie in her scrubs, she had come straight from a shift, or wanted them to think she had. They settled into the chairs with the body language of people who had been waiting for something and were finally in position. For the first 2 minutes, they talked about parking, about which entrance had the shortest walk. Vanessa complained about the elevator. I sat in my hotel room and watched this and felt something hollow open up in the center of my chest. Then Rick leaned forward, elbows on knees, and his voice dropped into the register I recognized from the cabin recordings, the deal-closing register, the one that meant the real conversation was beginning. Cassie, what's the actual timeline looking like? Cassie pulled out her phone and scrolled with the practiced efficiency of someone consulting a work document. Her kidney function is at 18%. Below 15 is considered end stage. The attending has her on comfort measures, now not intervention. She looked up. 48 to 72 hours, possibly less. My hand went to my mouth, not to stop a sound, I didn't make one, but because there was nowhere else for my hand to go. Okay, Rick said. He pulled out his own phone. He pulled up what I could see, even from the camera angle, was a real estate listing, a photograph of the Lake Oswego house taken from the street. Our front yard. Dorothy's maple tree in the corner of the frame. Comps are running about 1.4 in that neighborhood right now. After the meridian balance is cleared, we're looking at somewhere between 800 and 900,000 to split. 3 ways, Vanessa said. 3 ways, Rick confirmed. Vanessa tucked her hair behind her ear and said as casually as someone discussing dinner plans, "What about the life insurance?" Cassie read the number off her phone. The number Dorothy had paid premiums on for 30 years. The number Dorothy had chosen specifically because she thought it would give me security after she was gone. Vanessa nodded slowly, doing math in her head that I could see moving across her face. "That's not bad," she said. "Combined with the property." "We need Dad on our side," Rick interrupted. "Or at least not working against us. If he gets difficult about the will, it slows everything down." "He won't get difficult," Cassie said, and her voice had the flat certainty of a woman who had been observing her father for 40 years and believed she had him accurately catalogued. "He never does. He'll be sad, and he'll be confused, and eventually he'll do whatever we tell him because that's what he does. That's what he does." I stopped the video. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed with the laptop screen frozen on my daughter's face, mouth still open on the last word she had said about me, and I pressed both hands flat on my thighs and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way a man breathes when he is deciding whether to let something destroy him or whether to use it instead. The burning behind my eyes was fierce and dry. I would not cry for this. I had cried for Dorothy for the years she spent alone with the truth for the reading glasses on the cabin windowsill. I did not have tears left for the moment. My children sat in a waiting room 40 feet from where their mother was dying and discussed the sale price of her house. I pressed play again. Vanessa had pulled up her Instagram. She was writing a caption. I could see her thumb moving while Rick talked logistics. She paused, tilted the phone to Rick, and he glanced at it and nodded. She posted something. Right then. While Dorothy was alive 40 feet away, Vanessa Mercer Walsh posted something to her 280,000 followers and then put her phone away and resumed the conversation about property values. Near the end of the tape, Vanessa glanced toward the hallway and said, "Should we check on Dad, see if he needs anything?" Rick looked at the hallway, then looked back at his phone. "Let him have his time," he said. It's easier this way. Easier. The video ended at 2:57 p.m., 43 minutes. That was how long it took. I closed the laptop very gently, the way you handle something you no longer have any feeling about. I stood up and walked to the window and looked out over the Lloyd district. The lights of the convention center, the steel bridge in the distance, the Willamette black and wide below. Portland, going about its Monday night, indifferent and alive. I thought about Dorothy setting up that recording, asking Patricia to place the device, knowing with absolute certainty what her children would do when they thought no one was watching, knowing and still giving them the choice. The trap she had built was not built from hatred. It was built from the final, exhausted love of a woman who had spent 50 years hoping she was wrong about them. She had not been wrong. I picked up my phone and called Alice. "I watched it," I said. Her voice was careful and warm. "Are you all right?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm ready. Whatever comes next, I'm ready." "Good," Alice said. "Because tomorrow morning I need you to come in. Dorothy left one more thing I wasn't supposed to show you until now." She called it the map. I turned away from the window and sat back down on the edge of the bed. "Tell me about the map," I said. Alice was already in the conference room when I arrived. Coffee on the table. 2 cups, the folder in the center, placed with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that what was inside deserved a moment of preparation before it was opened. I had not slept more than 3 hours. My eyes felt like they had been rubbed with sandpaper from the inside, and every muscle in my back carried the specific ache of a man who had spent a week being hit by things he hadn't seen coming. "Sit down, Hal," Alice said. Not unkindly, just the way she always said it, as a fact, as an invitation, as the beginning of something. I sat. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup, because the warmth was the first comfortable thing I had felt since Sunday night. "Dorothy sent me this 3 weeks before she was admitted for the last time," Alice said, sliding the folder across. "She called it the map. She told me, and I'm quoting exactly because she was very precise about her language, 'Don't show Hal this until he calls you and tells you he's ready. He'll know when that is. And when he is, give it to him all at once. Don't soften it.'" I opened the folder, 12 pages typed and single-spaced, organized with headers and subheadings, the way Dorothy organized every important document in her life. At the top of the first page, in the only handwriting on the document she had written for Hal. The whole truth at last. I read it in the conference room with Alice sitting across from me, drinking her coffee and not saying a word, giving me the space Dorothy had asked her to give me. The map was exactly what it said it was. Dorothy had documented every decision she had made in the 3 years of preparation, not just the evidence gathering, but the reasoning behind each step, the order she had chosen, and most devastatingly, the moments when she had almost told me. November 2 years ago. Hal came home with flowers, yellow tulips, the ones I always liked, and sat across from me at dinner and said, "I feel like something is wrong with you. Talk to me." I almost did. I had the words ready. But I looked at his face, the same face I have been looking at for 45 years, the one that still believes the best of every person it loves, and I knew that if I told him, then he would have gone to them. He would have sat down with Rick and said, "Son, what's happening?" And Rick would have cried and said the right things, and Hal would have forgiven him before the week was out. I put down my fork and said, "I'm just tired." He believed me. He always believes me. My throat closed up so hard I had to set the pages down for a moment. "Take your time," Alice said quietly. "I'm fine," I said, which was not true, but which was necessary. The middle pages of the map detailed something that hit me differently than anything else I had read that week: Dorothy's account of the moment she decided to stop trying to fix our children and start documenting them instead. She placed it at a Tuesday afternoon in January 3 years ago, when she had called Cassie to tell her about a new diagnosis, and Cassie had responded by asking whether the diagnosis would affect Dorothy's life insurance classification. That was the moment Dorothy had written. Not the worst thing they ever did. Just the moment I finally stopped explaining their behavior to myself and started recording it instead. I drove to the gorge that afternoon and walked the trail above the river for 2 hours. By the time I got back to the car, I knew what I had to do. She had bought the cabin the following month. The final pages of the map were the ones that undid me completely. Dorothy had written in the careful language of a woman who chose every word like it was the last one. She had what she wanted for me after she was gone. Not money, not justice, though she wanted that too. She wanted me to understand fully, completely, without the protective fog of my own lifelong habit of generosity, what my life had actually been worth. Hal has spent 74 years believing that loving people means absorbing their worst behavior and finding reasons to stay. I have loved this about him, and I have watched it cost him more than he knows. What I want him to understand, when all of this is over, is that the love he gave our children was real and complete and entirely undeserved by them. That is not a failure. That is a statement about who he is versus who they chose to become. I am leaving him the map so he can stop second-guessing himself, so he can look at the whole picture assembled by someone who loves him and trust what he sees. My eyes were burning so fiercely I had to press my fingers against them until the pressure was enough to hold everything back. I kept them there for a long moment, breathing through my nose, not letting go. She was something, I finally managed. She was extraordinary, Alice said simply. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope Whitmore had given me, the one with Dorothy's final session notes. I had been carrying it for 2 days without opening it, because Whitmore had said, "When you're ready," and I had needed to read the map first to know what ready felt like. I broke the seal. 3 pages, handwritten, the letters uneven and slow. She had written this when her hands were already failing her. But every word was clear. I told Samuel today that I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of leaving Hal alone with a version of our children that he still believes in. So I am not leaving him alone. I am leaving him the truth. And I am leaving him Alice, and I am leaving him the cabin. And I am leaving him everything I know about how to stand up after something tries to knock you down. He will think he failed them. He will go through a period of asking himself what he did wrong. I want the record to show, and I want Samuel to tell him this in person if he needs to hear it from another human being, that Harold Mercer did not fail his children. He loved them completely. They failed him. That is a different thing entirely, and he must not spend whatever time he has left confusing the two. I folded the pages and held them against my chest, the way I had held every important thing Dorothy had ever given me. And I sat in Alice Vanderbilt's conference room on a Tuesday morning and let myself grieve, not for the children I had lost, but for the woman who had loved me well enough to tell me the truth. The 6 weeks between Dorothy's death and the November 18th hearing moved the way bad weather moves over Oregon slowly, with weight leaving damage you only fully understand after it clears. I spent most of those weeks at Alice's office or at the cabin in the gorge, and I want to be clear about something. I did not orchestrate what happened next. I did not call anyone, did not leak anything, did not make a single move against my children that was not strictly necessary for my own legal defense. What happened to Rick and Vanessa and Cassie in those 6 weeks, they built it themselves. Every piece of it. Dorothy had predicted it with the accuracy of a woman who had been studying them for 3 years, and she had been right about this too, the way she had been right about everything else. It started with Vanessa. Alice called me on a Thursday morning in mid-October, her voice carrying the particular quality it got when she was about to tell me something that was both bad and useful. Someone filed an anonymous complaint with the Aging with Dignity Foundation, she said. Detailed, specific, included dates, amounts, and copies of Vanessa's original grant applications alongside the actual visitor log from Dorothy's medical records. A pause. The complaint was filed from an IP address registered to Rick's home office. I sat with that for a moment. Rick had taken the evidence Dorothy gathered about his sister and used it as a weapon. Not to help me, to eliminate a competitor for the inheritance. What happens now, I asked. The foundation has frozen the relationship and referred it to their legal team, Alice said. If they pursue it, Vanessa is looking at wire fraud charges, federal, not state. Another pause. Hal, I want you to know this changes nothing about our strategy. We don't need their implosion to win, but I won't pretend it doesn't help. I know, I said. Vanessa's response came within 72 hours. She had apparently been keeping her own files the way this family kept files. I was starting to understand was something Dorothy had passed down to all of us, just for different purposes. Vanessa contacted a reporter at the Willamette Week Portland's alternative newspaper and provided a detailed account of Rick's debt to Meridian Capital, including the amount, the interest rate, and the fact that he had used the family home as collateral without his parents' knowledge or consent. The story ran on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, 2 of Rick's remaining business partners had called to discuss the terms of their agreements. By Thursday, Rick's attorney had filed a motion to delay the will contest hearing, claiming his client needed additional time to prepare. Alice filed an immediate opposition. The motion was denied. Then came Cassie. I learned about this one from Alice, who had learned it from a contact at the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. On a Wednesday morning in late October, Cassandra Mercer had walked into the East Precinct on SE 106th, identified herself, and provided a written statement alleging that her brother Richard Mercer had committed document fraud, specifically the falsification of collateral agreements and the forgery of their mother's signature on financial documents. When Alice told me this, I was standing in the cabin kitchen making coffee, and I set the kettle down carefully on the counter because my hands had started to shake, not from grief this time, not from rage, but from the strange, cold recognition of watching a prediction come true in real time. She's trying to make a deal, I said. She came to my office first, Alice said, and her voice had gone carefully neutral. The day before, she went to the police. She asked whether there was a path to cooperation, whether providing testimony against Rick and Vanessa would affect her own exposure in the case. My chest tightened. What did you tell her? I told her I represent you exclusively and that I could not advise her on her own legal situation. A beat. I also told her that the evidence against all 3 of them was already complete, and that her cooperation, while potentially useful to the district attorney's office, would not change the outcome of the will contest. How did she take that? She cried, Alice said, and her voice softened just slightly at the edges. Real tears, I think. Not the kind Vanessa produces on demand. She sat in my office and cried and said, I don't know when I became this person. And then she left and went to the police the next morning. I did not know what to do with that, the image of Cassie crying in Alice's office saying, I don't know when I became this person. I had spent a week watching video footage of her reading her mother's kidney function like a project update. And now this. I turned it over in my mind for a long time and could not find a place to put it that felt right. Rick's response to Cassie's police report was immediate and vicious. He filed his own complaint, this one, with the Oregon State Board of Nursing, alleging that Cassie had violated federal HIPAA regulations by accessing Dorothy's medical records without clinical justification, which was, to be precise about it, entirely true. Cassie had accessed those records 34 times for reasons that had nothing to do with her mother's care and everything to do with her siblings' financial planning. Rick had helped engineer that situation, and now he was using it as ammunition. The 3 of them were by early November in the process of destroying each other with the same efficiency they had once applied to destroying Dorothy's peace of mind. Alice updated me every few days. I listened and took notes, and felt something I could not quite name, not satisfaction, not grief, not anger. something quieter, something like the particular exhaustion of a man who had been proven right about something he desperately wished he'd been wrong about. On November 15th, the day Rick's debt to Meridian Capital came due, I was sitting on the cabin porch watching the gorge go dark when Alice called. "The debt situation just changed," she said, and I could hear something in her voice that might have been relief. Meridian Capital's attorneys discovered the irregularity in the collateral documentation. The forged signature on Dorothy's portion of the agreement. They've concluded that the collateral clause is void ab initio invalid from the beginning because it was executed with a fraudulent signature. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means the Lake Oswego property is not legally encumbered by Rick's debt," Alice said. "Your home is clear. Whatever Rick owes Meridian Capital, he owes it without the backing of your house." A pause. Dorothy's forgery documentation, the comparison she had done with the notary, is what made this possible. She protected your home from beyond the grave, Hal. I sat on that porch with the Columbia River invisible in the dark below me and pressed my free hand flat against the railing and felt the rough wood grain under my palm and thought about Dorothy driving out here 18 months ago to buy this cabin sick and alone and already building the architecture of everything that was now piece by piece falling into place. 3 days, Alice said. The hearing is in 3 days. Saturday night, November 15th. The digital clock on the motel nightstand read 8:04 p.m., and I was still in the same clothes I'd worn to Alice's office that morning. The room smelled like stale carpet and the faint ghost of someone else's coffee. Outside rain tapped against the window of my room on Barber Boulevard, steady, patient, indifferent to everything happening inside these 4 walls. 3 days until the hearing. I kept saying that out loud. 3 days, just to make it feel real. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, my reading glasses on the nightstand, a cold cup of coffee beside them when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my chest tighten the way a fist closes around something fragile. Rick Mercer. I picked up on the second ring. "Dad." His voice was lower than usual, rougher. Not the voice of a man trying to sell anything. This was something raw or worn down to the grain. "I need to talk to you, in person." "You can say whatever you need to say to Alice," I told him, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, given that my hand was already trembling against the phone. "This isn't about the hearing." A pause. Rain hit the window. "Then I made a mistake, Dad. A lot of mistakes. I know that. But if you let this go to court on Tuesday, it's going to destroy everything for all of us." My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. Everything. As if there was still something left to destroy that he hadn't already set on fire. "Rick," I said carefully, "your mother died 43 days ago. 43 days. Do you remember what you were doing that night while she was in that bed?" He didn't answer right away. I heard him breathe unsteady, jagged, the kind of breathing that happens when a person is fighting with themselves. "I know what the video shows," he said at last. "Then you know why I'm not pulling back. Dad, please." His voice cracked wide open, and God help me, some ancient part of my chest responded to that sound, the way a father always does, no matter how old the child is or how deep the wound goes. But I pressed my free hand flat against my sternum, holding that reflex down like a lid on something boiling. "I have people I owe money to, real people, not a bank people. If the full story comes out in court, it's already out, Rick." My voice came out harder than I intended, and I didn't soften it. "Willamette Week ran the story 3 weeks ago. The whole city knows. The full financial details haven't. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you forged your mother's signature on a $500,000 mortgage." The line went quiet enough that I could hear the rain outside doubling in intensity, sheets of it now against the glass, turning the parking lot into a mirror. "I need you to drop the fraud evidence," Rick said. And now his voice had shifted. The crack was gone, replaced by something flat and almost mechanical, as if he'd run out of sun and defaulted back to negotiator. Just the financial fraud. Let the will contest proceed on its own. That's all I'm asking. Cold moved through me. Not anger, something more final than that. The feeling of watching a door close forever and knowing you won't try the handle again. That's all you're asking, I repeated. It keeps me out of criminal territory, and it keeps the family name out of our name. The words came up my throat like gravel. Rick, your name is already in the court filing. Your name is on the Meridian Capital documents. Your name is on the email you sent Jerry Hoffman with $15,000 attached to it. My hand was shaking against my knee now, and I pressed it flat. The only name I'm worried about is your mother's. She spent the last 3 years of her life building a case to protect what we built together, and I will not let you bargain that away over a phone call on a Saturday night. A sound came through the line that I couldn't name immediately, not crying exactly. Something raw, like a man who has finally run out of moves and feels the ground under his feet give way. She knew, didn't she, he said. Not a question. She knew everything. For how long? Long enough to buy a cabin in the gorge and spend 2 years filling it with proof. He made that sound again, and this time I recognized it. Shame. Arriving all at once, too late and too large to do anyone any good. I loved her dad. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I know you don't believe that. I believe you believed it, I said, and I was surprised by how exhausted I sounded. Not angry anymore, just emptied out, scraped clean. But love isn't what you do when someone's watching. It's what you do when no one is. I ended the call. I sat without moving for a long moment, the phone face down on the bed beside me, the rain hammering the window. Now the parking lot below glowing orange under the street lamps. Then I stood up, pulled on my jacket, and drove 40 minutes east on the historic Columbia River Highway into the gorge. I needed the cabin. I needed the cedar smell and the creak of that pine floor and the particular silence of a place where Dorothy had once sat alone and decided she was going to fight for us even when I didn't know we needed fighting for. It was nearly 10 o'clock on Saturday night when I unlocked the door. The cabin was cold and dark, but I got the wood stove going small pieces first, then larger the way her letter had taught me, and sat down in the old pine chair by the window. Outside, the Columbia River moved through the November dark, vast and indifferent, the same as it always was. I pulled Dorothy's last letter from my jacket pocket. Not the map, not the evidence files. The small, cream-colored envelope she'd tucked beneath everything else, the one marked in her precise schoolteacher handwriting. Open when you are afraid of what comes next. I'd carried it for 43 days without breaking the seal. Tonight, sitting in her cabin on the 15th of November with 3 days left until the hearing, I finally did. My hands were not shaking when I opened it. I don't know exactly when that happened. Hal, she had written, if you're reading this, you weren't afraid of the truth. You were only afraid of what comes after it. That's not weakness. That's just love. I pressed the letter to my chest, closed my eyes, and let Sunday find me sitting right there. Sunday passed, the way grief sometimes does, quietly on the surface, violent underneath. I drove back from the gorge cabin before sunrise. The Columbia River still dark and mist-covered on my left. The November 16th sky just beginning to bruise gray at the edges. I had Dorothy's opened letter in my jacket pocket and 3 cups of bad gas station coffee keeping me upright. Alice had told me to come in Monday morning for the final briefing, but she'd also sent a text late Sunday afternoon asking me to stop by her office to review one last motion the other side had filed. I was halfway through downtown Portland on Burnside when the text came through. I pulled over, read it, felt my stomach drop. The other side had filed a motion to exclude the audio recordings. Cited improper chain of custody. Submitted at 7:04 p.m. on Saturday night, while Rick was calling me from what I now figured was his attorney's office. My fingers tightened on the phone until the edges bit into my palm. Alice's second message arrived 30 seconds later. Don't panic. Harmon denied it at 9:15 this morning. Call me when you land. I sat in the car on Burnside with my eyes closed for a full 30 seconds, breathing through my nose, feeling my heartbeat slowly drop back below something that could kill a 74-year-old man. Then I called her. She picked up on the first ring. You saw the messages, she said. I saw them. Walk me through it. Their argument was chain of custody, that the recordings passed through too many hands between Dorothy's cabin and our exhibit list. Judge Harmon disagreed. I could hear papers moving on Alice's end, the efficient rustle of someone who'd been at her desk since dawn on a Sunday. Oregon one-party consent is airtight here, Hal. Dorothy made those recordings herself in her own home during her own conversations. The folder timestamps match the recording metadata. Her handwritten index in the cabin matches the digital file names. There is nothing to exclude. The relief that moved through me was so physical, it nearly took my legs out, a sudden loosening in my chest, like a knot I hadn't realized was choking me finally giving way. My eyes burned and I pressed 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose. Okay, I said. Okay, what else? Cassie. Alice's tone shifted, still measured, but with something careful underneath it, the way she sounded when she was about to hand me something sharp. Her attorney called this morning. She's requesting to give a voluntary statement directly to Judge Harmon before Tuesday's proceedings open. That stopped me cold. Outside the car window, a woman jogged past with a yellow raincoat and a dog on a leash, completely ordinary, completely unaware that my entire world had just rearranged itself again. A voluntary statement, I said. She wants to speak before the hearing formally opens. Her attorney says she intends to confirm the authenticity of the medical access logs, the 34 unauthorized pulls on Dorothy's records, and she intends to explain the context. I let out a breath that felt like it had been stored inside me since October 3rd. She's confessing, I said, in her own way. On her own terms. Alice's voice softened just slightly, not unprofessionally, just humanly. I want you prepared for that, Hal. Sitting in that courtroom and listening to Cassie address the judge, that won't be easy. No, I agreed, and my voice came out scraped and low. It won't. We went through the exhibits for 2 hours over the phone. By the time I pulled into Alice's building on Southwest Broadway for the in-person review, Monday morning, I'd already read the final list twice. 15 items, 12 pages. Dorothy's 3-year project reduced to numbered lines in a manila folder, and somehow looking at it that way, it felt both smaller and larger than I could bear. At one point, Alice looked up from her legal pad and studied me across the conference table. You don't have to be present Tuesday, she said. I can represent your interests without you in the room. I'll be there. The words came out before she finished. Hal, she sat alone in that hospital bed for the last 6 days of her life. My jaw locked around the words, and I had to push them out one at a time like moving stones. She built all of this without me because she was trying to keep me from breaking. I'm not going to let her do that final part alone, too. My hand found the edge of the conference table and gripped it knuckles white against the wood. I will be there, Alice. She looked at me for a long moment. Really looked the way people do when they're checking whether you mean something or whether you're just saying it to feel brave. Then she nodded once and went back to her files. It was past 4 o'clock when I walked out onto Southwest Broadway. The November air hit clean and cold, carrying rain and city, and something that smelled like the river from 6 blocks away. I stood on the sidewalk with my hands in my jacket pockets, not ready to move yet. My phone buzzed. Vanessa, I answered. Dad. Her voice was the polished version, controlled precise, the one she used for the camera. Whatever happens tomorrow, I think you're making a terrible mistake. Do you? You're going to humiliate this family in public, in a courthouse, for what? A house money. Something ignited in my chest, hotter and more clarifying than rage. For your mother, I said. That's what for. Mom wouldn't have. Don't! The word came out sharp and absolute. Don't tell me what she would have wanted. She wrote it down, Vanessa. 12 pages of it in her own handwriting, notarized and witnessed. You don't get to rewrite that. Her polished voice cracked suddenly and completely, like glass under pressure. I was drowning, Dad. The foundation was under audit. I had debt I couldn't. Then you should have called us. My throat tightened until it burned. You should have said, I'm in trouble, I need help. That's what we were there for. That's what we would have done, no questions asked. My voice broke on the last word, and I pressed my fist against my sternum, fighting to hold the rest of it back. Instead, you turned your mother's death into content. She was crying now, real crying, the kind that can't be framed or filtered. Ragged, wet, uncontrolled. I'm sorry, she said. Dad, I am so sorry. I believed the sorry. I did. It didn't change what she'd done, but I believed it. I know, I said quietly. I know you are. I hung up and stood there in the rain for another minute. Eyes burning, face tilted slightly upward, the way you do when you don't want the tears to actually fall. Then I got in the car and drove back to the gorge. That night, I ate soup from a can and sat beside the wood stove until the embers went gray and cool. I thought about Dorothy sitting in this same chair alone, building the case that would outlast her. I thought about Rick's cracked voice on Saturday night, and Vanessa sobbing into a phone on a Sunday afternoon, and Cassie somewhere preparing words she'd have to say out loud to a judge in less than 24 hours. Tomorrow was Monday. The hearing was Tuesday, November 18th. Dorothy, I thought, watching the last ember fade. I'm going in. And for the first time in 45 days, I did not feel alone when I said it. I left the cabin at 6:15 on the morning of November 18th. The Columbia River was invisible in the dark, but I could hear it, that low, constant movement beneath the mist, like the earth breathing. I stood on the cabin porch for a moment. Before getting in the car, my jacket collar up against the cold, Dorothy's opened letter pressed flat in my breast pocket against my chest. I'd slept 4 hours. My eyes felt like sandpaper. My legs felt like they belonged to someone 20 years older than me. I drove west on the historic Columbia River Highway, with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. By the time the city lights of Portland appeared through the rain, it was 7:45. I found parking 2 blocks from the Multnomah County Courthouse on Southwest 4th Avenue, a gray concrete building that looked exactly as serious as what was about to happen inside it. Alice was waiting on the front steps, her silver hair pulled back, a charcoal coat buttoned to the collar, a leather briefcase at her side. She looked like someone who had done this 100 times and intended to do it 100 more. When she saw me walking up from the sidewalk, she came down 2 steps and put her hand on my arm. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Ask me in 3 hours," I said. She almost smiled. "Fair enough." Before we go in, Cassie's attorney confirmed she'll give her statement the moment Harmon opens the courtroom. I want you seated in the gallery before she speaks. I need you to hear it, but I also need you to hold it together when you do. My throat tightened. I'll hold it together. I mean it, Hal. Alice's grip on my arm was firm, deliberate. Whatever she says in there, whatever she confesses, you do not react visibly. No sound, no movement. Harmon will be watching the gallery. I understand. She studied my face the way she had across the conference table on Monday, checking whether I meant it or whether I was just saying it to feel brave. Whatever she saw, it must have been enough because she released my arm and turned toward the door. "Then let's go," she said. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. Room 412, 4th floor, a narrow gallery with wooden benches worn smooth by decades of people coming here with things that mattered too much. The fluorescent lights overhead were flat and merciless. I sat in the second row of the gallery, Alice at the plaintiff's table to my left, and I put my hands flat on my thighs and kept them there. Rick and Vanessa were already seated at the respondent's table with their attorney, a man named Bradley Sutton, early 50s, silver tie. the kind of careful blankness on his face that courtroom lawyers develop after years of sitting next to people who've done things they can't defend. Rick was in a dark suit that looked like it had been pressed that morning. He was staring at the surface of the table. Vanessa had her hair down and her hands folded in front of her, and she was looking at the Oregon state seal on the wall above the judge's bench, as if it might tell her something useful. Neither of them looked at me when I came in. But I felt Rick's shoulders shift slightly when I sat down. A small involuntary tightening the body, registering what the face refuses to show. Cassie was at a separate table to the right, alone except for her attorney, a quiet woman named Deborah Raines who wore steel-rimmed glasses and spoke in complete, careful sentences. Cassie had her hands in her lap and her back very straight, the posture of someone who has rehearsed their own courage all night and is now down to whatever is left of it. She looked smaller than I remembered. Younger. The dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept either. When she turned and saw me in the gallery, something crossed her face that I didn't have a word for. Not quite shame, not quite relief, something in between, something bruised and complicated. Her eyes filled immediately, and she pressed her lips together hard, fighting it back. Her chin was trembling. I held her gaze. I didn't look away, and I didn't give her anything. Not forgiveness. Not coldness. Just my eyes steady, saying, "I'm here. Say what you came to say. Say." She nodded just barely. Then she turned back to face the front of the courtroom. Judge Patricia Harmon entered at exactly 9 o'clock, a compact woman in her late 50s with a gray bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She moved with the unhurried certainty of someone who has seen every version of human failure that can fit inside a courtroom and has made peace with all of them. "This is the matter of the estate of Dorothy Ann Mercer," she said, settling into her chair and opening the file in front of her. "Before we formally open proceedings, I understand we have a voluntary statement from a party." "Ms. Raines." Deborah Raines rose. "That's correct, Your Honor. My client Cassandra Mercer wishes to address the court directly." "Ms. Mercer." Judge Harmon looked at Cassie over her reading glasses. "You may proceed." Cassie stood. Her legs were visibly unsteady. I watched her press her fingertips briefly to the table's edge to ground herself. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and spoke. "My name is Cassandra Mercer. I'm the youngest child of Harold and Dorothy Mercer." Her voice came out surprisingly clear, though I could hear the effort it was costing her, every word landing like something she was setting down after carrying it too long. "Between March of 2024 and October of 2025, I accessed my mother's medical records at Providence St. Vincent Medical Center 34 times without her consent and without a legitimate clinical purpose. I provided summaries of her prognosis to my brother Richard and my sister Vanessa. I told myself I was keeping the family informed." She stopped, swallowed hard. Her hands were gripping the table edge now, white-knuckled and shaking. That was a lie, I told myself. What I was actually doing was helping them time what came next. The courtroom was absolutely still. Cassie's composure broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Tears spilled down her face, and her voice dropped to something raw and barely held together. "I am a nurse. I swore to protect patients. My mother was my patient, and my mother and I failed her in both." She pressed a fist against her mouth for a moment, fighting herself back. "Then I'm sorry. I'm sorry to this court, and I'm sorry to my father. I don't expect either of you to, I just needed to say it where it counted." My chest cracked open. I pressed both hands hard against my knees and stared at the Oregon state seal on the wall above Judge Harmon's head, because if I looked at Cassie for one more second, I was going to come apart in a courtroom, and I had promised Alice I wouldn't. Judge Harmon made a note. "Thank you, Ms. Mercer. You may be seated." She looked up at the room. "We'll now proceed to the formal hearing. Ms. Vanderbilt, you may call your first witness. Alice rose smooth and steady and opened her briefcase. Whatever came next, Dorothy had built it to hold. Alice called her first witness at 9:12 on the morning of November 18th. And from the moment she opened her mouth, I understood that Dorothy had not simply left evidence, she had left a prosecution. The first witness was Dr. Leonard Marsh, a forensic accountant from Portland State University's accounting program. A thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, and the particular calm of someone who has spent his career turning financial wreckage into coherent sentences. He settled into the witness chair, adjusted the microphone, and began. Dr. Marsh, Alice said, can you describe what you found when you examined the mortgage documents submitted under Exhibit 7? Certainly. He opened his folder without hurry. Exhibit 7 is a deed of trust submitted to Meridian Capital Partners of Nevada, using the Lake Oswego property valued at approximately $1.2 million as collateral for a loan of $340,000. The document bears a signature attributed to Dorothy Ann Mercer, dated February 14, 2025. He paused. Our handwriting analysis cross-referenced against 11 authenticated signature samples from Dorothy Mercer's personal correspondence, her teaching records, and her notarized will determined with a confidence level of 94% that the signature on Exhibit 7 was not written by Dorothy Mercer. Bradley Sutton was on his feet before Marsh finished the sentence. Objection, Your Honor, Foundation. Overruled, Judge Harmon said without looking up from her notes. Continue, Dr. Marsh. From the corner of my eye, I could see Rick's jaw tighten. Vanessa's folded hands pressed harder against each other, the knuckles going pale. Additionally, Marsh continued, the loan balance as of October 3, 2025 had grown to $411,000, owing to a 22% annual interest rate applied from the date of origination. The Lake Oswego property was listed as sole collateral. Had this loan proceeded to default, which Meridian Capital Partners indicated was their intention prior to discovering the signature irregularity, the property would have been subject to foreclosure proceedings. Thank you, Dr. Marsh. Alice turned to the gallery, not to me, to the room. No further questions. Sutton cross-examined for 12 minutes and got nowhere. Marsh answered every challenge with the same unhurried precision, citing page numbers and confidence intervals until Sutton sat back down, with the careful blankness of a man who knows when he's finished. The audio recordings came in at 10:20. Alice had the court's audio system play 3 segments each, no longer than 4 minutes. Each pulled from Dorothy's documented folder system on the memory card. The first was Rick and Vanessa on a phone call from July 2025, discussing the Lake Oswego property's market value and what they'd net after paying off the Meridian loan. Rick's voice filled the courtroom like something solid. By the time the estate clears probate, we're looking at $800 clear. Split 3 ways, that's more than enough to cover what I owe Meridian and still have Cass taken care of. And Dad, Vanessa's voice. Dad's 74. He doesn't need $1 million house. He needs a decent place to live and his pension. We're not monsters, Van. My hands were flat on my thighs. I was pressing down so hard I could feel my own pulse against my palms. My eyes were burning, and I blinked slowly once and kept my face forward. The second recording was Cassie on a call with Rick in August 2025. Reading from what was clearly a medical summary, Mom's latest MRI, the oncologist's timeline, the likelihood of a rapid decline in the final 6 weeks. Her voice was clinical, efficient. She'd been a nurse for 16 years, and she knew exactly which words to use. Listening to her describe her own mother's death in those terms, I had to press my fist against my mouth and breathe through my nose for a full 10 seconds. Before I trusted myself not to make a sound. The third recording was the waiting room video, the 43 minutes from October 3rd. Alice played 8 minutes of it, the part where Rick said clearly and without ambiguity, the will's not gonna be a problem. Hoffman's handling it. Vanessa responding, good. I need this done before the end of the year. When the audio stopped, the courtroom felt different. Not quieter, it had been quiet throughout, but heavier. Like the air itself had absorbed something it couldn't put down. Sutton's second objection attempt relevance was overruled in under 10 seconds. At 11:40, Alice rested the plaintiff's case. Sutton rose and called Rick to the stand. Rick walked to the witness chair with his shoulders pulled back and his jaw set, and for a moment he looked like the version of himself I'd been proud of, my son, the businessman, the one who'd inherited his mother's confidence and his grandfather's stubbornness. Then Alice began her cross-examination. Mr. Mercer, the email in Exhibit 11, the one sent to Gerald Hoffman on September 2nd of this year with a wire transfer of $15,000 attached. Did you send that email? Rick's jaw worked. That was a retainer. Mr. Mercer, did you send that email? Yes. The word came out flat and final like a door closing. And at the time you sent it was Gerald Hoffman already engaged as your mother's estate attorney. A pause that lasted just one beat too long. Yes, so you paid $15,000 to your mother's own attorney while she was still alive, and while he was still bound to represent her interests. Alice's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Is that correct? Rick's eyes dropped to the surface of the witness stand. His whole body seemed to contract slightly, like something deflating. Yes, he said, that's correct. From the gallery, I watched my son's face as the last version of his story collapsed under him. My eyes were burning again. My chest was a closed fist. But I didn't look away, because Dorothy hadn't looked away either, not for 3 years, not through any of it, and the least I could do was hold steady for the 11 minutes it took Alice to finish. When Rick stepped down, his shoulders were no longer pulled back. Judge Harmon looked at the clock, then at the room. We'll recess for lunch and reconvene at 2 o'clock for closing statements. She gathered her file. Court is in recess. The gavel came down like a period at the end of a very long sentence. I sat in the gallery, after everyone else had started moving my hands, still flat on my thighs, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Alice appeared beside me and put her hand briefly on my shoulder. You held together, she said quietly. Dorothy would have been annoyed if I hadn't, I said. Alice laughed, a real one, small and warm. She absolutely would have. Somewhere in this building, the afternoon was still waiting. The closing statements, the deliberation, whatever Judge Harmon was going to say at 2 o'clock. But right now, in this particular moment, I let myself feel one thing clearly. Dorothy had walked into that courtroom 45 days before anyone else did. She had built the case, laid the foundation, chosen the attorney, preserved the evidence, and written a letter for a day I couldn't have survived without it. Whatever Harmon ruled this afternoon, Dorothy had already won. Court reconvened at 2 o'clock exactly. I know because I counted the seconds from 1:59 sitting in that same wooden bench in room 412, my hands flat on my thighs, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like they had been since 9 that morning. Alice was at the plaintiff's table, steady as she'd been all day. Bradley Sutton sat beside Rick and Vanessa, keeping his face neutral the way attorneys do when they already know how this ends. Rick hadn't looked at me once since his cross-examination. Vanessa looked at me briefly when she came back from recess, then looked away fast, the way you do when something hurts more than you expected. Judge Patricia Harmon settled into her chair and opened her file. I've reviewed the closing arguments from both parties, she said. I'll deliver my findings now. The room contracted. Everyone leaned forward a fraction of an inch. The air went tight. The respondents have argued 3 grounds for contesting the will of Dorothy Ann Mercer: undue influence, diminished capacity, and improper execution. I'll address each in turn. On undue influence, denied. The audio recordings admitted under Oregon's one-party consent statute showed Dorothy acted in direct response to her children's conversations about the estate, not under anyone's manipulation. On diminished capacity, denied. Dr. Whitmore's records confirmed Dorothy's cognitive clarity through her final months. A 12-page handwritten index cross-referenced digital files, a notarized letter of intent, not the work of a diminished mind. On improper execution, denied. The will was witnessed, notarized, and filed in full accordance with Oregon revised statutes. Harmon looked up from her file and addressed the room directly. The will of Dorothy Ann Mercer is valid and shall be admitted to probate. The estate passes to Harold James Mercer in its entirety. She paused. Furthermore, under Oregon Revised Statutes, Section 116.183, the respondent's contest was brought without reasonable cause. Attorney's fees shall be assessed against the respondents. The gavel came down. I don't remember standing up. I just became aware that I was one hand gripping the bench in front of me, the other pressed flat against my chest over Dorothy's letter, my legs not entirely steady beneath me. Alice appeared at my side. "Hal?" Her voice was warm in a way I hadn't heard before, not professional, just human. "It's done." My throat closed completely. I nodded, pressing my lips together hard, blinking against everything I'd been holding back since 9 that morning. Across the room, Rick sat with his face in his hands, elbows on the table, shoulders caved inward. Vanessa was crying quietly, her hand over her mouth. Cassie was already looking at me when I turned her face open and devastated her chin, trembling the way it had when she was small and frightened. She mouthed 2 words. "I'm sorry." My chest broke open. I pressed my fingers against my eyes, breathed through my nose 3 times, then looked back at her and nodded. That was all I had. But it was something. Alice handed me an envelope in the 4th-floor hallway after the room had cleared. "Dorothy left this with me," she said, "for after, whatever the outcome. Cream-colored. Small. Her handwriting on the front for Hal. After." My hands were shaking as I turned it over, not from age or cold, but from something that moved through me in a long, slow wave. "I'll read it where she'd want me to read it," I said. Outside on Southwest 4th Avenue, the November rain had stopped for the first time in 3 days. Portland smelled like cold air and cedar, and something almost clean. I stood on the courthouse steps, face tilted up toward a sky finally improbably beginning to clear. Then I walked to my car and drove east toward the gorge. I opened Dorothy's second letter on the evening of November 18th, sitting in the pine chair by the cabin window, with the wood stove going and the Columbia River dark and moving beyond the tree line. The gorge was finally quiet after 3 days of rain. The last light was dying behind the ridge, leaving the sky that deep, particular blue that only happens in the Pacific Northwest in late autumn, the color of something ending gracefully, without apology. I broke the seal slowly. My hands were steadier than I expected. Hal she had written in that precise schoolteacher script I had loved for 47 years. "If you're reading this, then it's over. And you held together. I knew you would, you always did, even when you thought you weren't. Especially then." I stopped after the first 3 lines. I pressed the letter to my chest, closed my eyes, and let the fire crackle for a while. "I want you to know, I didn't do this out of anger. I was angry, yes, in the beginning. But by the time I bought this cabin, it wasn't anger anymore. It was love. Stubborn, inconvenient, refuses to give up love. The kind you taught me, actually. I learned it from watching you all those years. My eyes were burning, and this time I didn't try to stop it. I just let the tears fall slow and steady onto the paper in my hands. The house is yours. Everything is yours. But Hal, please don't keep it because it's worth money. You'll know the right answer. You always do, just always a little late." I laughed at that short, wet, helpless because it was so entirely her. By the first week of December, the story had moved beyond the courthouse. The Oregonian ran it on December 3rd, Lake Oswego man inherits estate, after children's fraud scheme exposed in court. Factually accurate in every detail, which was somehow worse for Rick and Vanessa than if it had been sensationalized. I called Alice that morning. Rick was settling with Meridian Capital, liquidating personal assets. Vanessa's foundation was under formal investigation. "I'm not glad about any of this," I told Alice. "I want you to know that. She said simply, "I know you're not. That's why Dorothy trusted you with it." I sold the Lake Oswego house on December 17th to a young family who had been renting in Portland for 4 years. When I shook the husband's hand, he said, "We'll take care of it." I believed him. Dorothy's fund, $240,000. I directed to Providence St. Vincent's Palliative Care Wing and the Oregon Nurses Association's Ethics Training Program. When I signed the final page on December 19th, my chest felt cleaner than it had in months. "Even Cassie," Alice asked, looking up from the paperwork. "Cassie asked if she could come see me sometime," I said. "I told her to give me until January. And Rick, when he's ready to call as my son instead of as a man managing a situation, I'll pick up." I spent Christmas Eve at the cabin. Dorothy's 2 letters in my breast pocket. Snow falling for the first time that winter, drifting through the Douglas firs, covering everything in something clean and entirely new. I pressed my hand over the letters and held it there. "I'm okay, Dot," I said out loud to the empty cabin and the snow and the river somewhere in the dark below. "I'm not good yet, but I'm okay." The fire crackled. The snow kept falling. The Columbia River kept moving, indifferent, vast, exactly the same as it had always been. Outside, the gorge was still. Inside, I was not alone. And that, in the end, was what she had left the light on for. Looking back now, I think the hardest part wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't reading Dorothy's letters or sitting alone in that cabin on Christmas Eve. The hardest part was realizing that I had loved my children so completely that I stopped seeing them clearly. And love without clear eyes is just a beautiful way of letting people hurt you slowly. If there's anything I'd want you to take from this family story, it's simply this: don't wait until someone is gone to understand how much they carried for you. Don't let the people who love you most become invisible because they never complained. And don't be like me, don't spend 47 years assuming that silence means everything is fine. Ask. Look. Pay attention to the ones who show up quietly every single day without asking for anything in return. I'm not a perfect man. I missed things I should have seen. But I believe, and I say this with everything I have left, that God put Dorothy in my life not just to love me, but to show me what love actually looks like when it decides to fight. That's the kind of grandpa stories worth telling. Not the easy ones. The ones that cost something. These grandpa stories are mine. This family story is real to me in every way that matters. And if any part of it stayed with you, if any word of it felt like something you needed to hear, then Dorothy did exactly what she set out to do. This has been a family story told by a man still learning what it means to truly deserve one. These grandpa stories will continue because some lessons take more than one telling. If something here moved you, share it with someone who needs it tonight. Leave a thought in the comments. I read everyone. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. The next story is already waiting. A note: before we continue, the stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted with care and purpose to educate, to illuminate, and occasionally to hold a mirror up to the parts of life we'd rather not examine alone. If that's not the journey you're looking for right now, no hard feelings. Step away and find what serves you best today. And to everyone who stayed until the very last word, thank you. Truly, it means more than you know.